Let us pray before we get into our message. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this beautiful day and for this camp and for this occasion you've given us to gather together as a church family. And as we fellowship with one another out here in nature for the next few days, I pray you would bless our time together, renew us and refresh us in our spiritual walk so that we can go back and be more effective witnesses for you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. One of the things I love doing most is reading. I don't have too many hobbies. I'm not a very talented guy. I can't sing. I just can sing. I tell people, if you shake me, and how many bones do we have in the body? About 210 bones. There's not a single musical bone in my body. My son plays the violin. He's played it at church several times. My daughter plays the violin too. And when my son was younger, I would carry his violin for him to church and to his recitals, and people would see me carry the violin, and for a moment they think perhaps I'm the violinist, and I don't say anything. I let them think that I'm musically minded, but I don't have that kind of talent. But I love to read, and I have books and books and books at home, and my wife will complain that I spend a lot of time curled up with a book, and there are books that I've never read because I've got so many. But there's one book that I got about 30 years ago. And I've read it, little chapters, beautiful messages. It's like a morning watch commentary, short chapters on topics that would interest all of us. No deep theology, but very, very, very deep thoughts in there. And this lady, her name is Ruth Center, and the title of this book is Startled by Silence. Ruth has written many books. I think she passed away a few years ago, but her books have blessed me, but this book in particular has been in my library for almost 30 years, and I have been blessed by it. And when you look at this book, you'll see there are a number of intriguing chapters in this book. God of the Jigsaw, Warm Days and Tombstones, What Do You Say to a Dying Man, Sermon in an Airport, Rocks Don't Cry. But there's a chapter in this book that intrigued me. It's titled Stranger in My House. Stranger in my house. And I want to use that story as a lead-in to our message today. And in this story, this is what Ruth Center writes. Ruth says, I sat up in my bed. It was around 12:30 at night, the wee hours of the morning. I sat up in my bed. I thought I was dreaming. But no, I wasn't dreaming. I heard voices coming up to the bedroom from downstairs. And I said to myself, what's happening? And then I didn't have to wonder for long because my husband, Mark, who happens to be a pastor, came up to the bedroom and says, Ruth, don't worry. It's just Tom, the drunk, the town drunk. He had too much to drink. The police nabbed him, and he has no place to go. So I thought perhaps a hot drink and a good, comfortable bed would help him. He would wake up in the morning, and he will feel better. And so I brought him in here. He's lying down on the living room couch, and I let him sleep there for the night, and tomorrow he'll be okay. And she said, I looked at my husband and said, he's a drunk. We know nothing about him. And you brought him into our house, and he's lying down on our living room couch. He's going to be sleeping there all night. Don't you know that there are stories, horror stories of people trying to help others, being good Christians, helping people, picking something up and giving them a ride. And these stories end up in tragedy. People murder you or do other bad things, or they may rob you. And you brought this man to our house. You know nothing about him. And before she could say anything else, Tom went downstairs to take care. Mark went downstairs to take care of Tom. And Ruth says, I went back to bed, but sleep would not come. I just watched the hands of the clock tick, 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 tick slowly through the hours of the night. And finally, my husband, Mark, came back to bed. He curled into bed, and before long, he was fast asleep. But she says, I just couldn't sleep because, she says, because of the stranger in my house. And she says, so many times I've had friends come to my house, and we treated them. We showed our hospitality to our friends. People just dropped in, and it was okay. But tonight, I had a drop-in. Somebody came to my house, and somehow I did not feel comfortable. was not able to entertain him. And she writes here, can we turn the lights off? It might be a little better. Could you do that, please? I know the hour is late. I turned around and looked at the clock. It's 9 something. And so I'm just going to work a little fast, and maybe I'll skip a few things and just get to the heart of the message, okay? And Ruth says, I had entertained guests many times. I prided myself on always having my coffee pot plugged in and my favorite brand of muffins stockpiled in the freezer for unexpected drop-ins. Tonight, we had an unexpected drop-in. Why was he so hard to accept? And she says, were my blueberry muffins and Colombian coffee only to be served to my kind of people? Did my front porch doormat say welcome only to those I knew and loved? Could only safe people sit and rest in my walnut rocker? These are the questions she asked herself. And then she said, as I asked myself these questions, this text from Matthew came to my mind. Matthew 5:46-48, taken from the New Living Translation. And this is how it reads. If you love, this is God speaking to Ruth that night, as she had thought about Tom the drunk on her living room couch. If you love only those who love you, what good is it? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even the pagan do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. You know, this is one of the most misunderstood texts in the Bible. The word perfect here has been used by a lot of Christians to mean that if I am to make it to heaven eventually, I must be perfect. I must be sinless. There should be no trace of sin in me. And this word is an unfortunate word that appears in the King James Version and in the Living Translation also. Be you perfect, even as your Father, which is in heaven, is perfect. Look at the context of this text. What Jesus is saying is, do not treat people well because they treat you well. Do not love them because they love you. But be like your Father which is in heaven. How does God love us? Does God love us because we love Him? No, He loves us unconditionally. And so what this text means, that if you are to be perfect, if you're to be mature, the correct word should be mature in your Christian walk. If you're to be a mature Christian and perfect in the sight of God, then you must be like God. Not in the sense that you're going to be perfect without sin, but you're going to love people as God loves you. God loves people unconditionally. You must love people unconditionally. You don't just love people who love you, but you love everybody. I like the way Eugene Peterson in The Message puts it. And he has a way of putting it. He uses language that we can relate to. And this is how he puts it. If all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a bonus? Anyone can do that. If you simply say hello to those who greet you, do you expect a medal? Any run-of-the-mill sinner does that. In a word, he says, what I am saying is this: grow up. Your kingdom subjects. What Matthew is saying here is that you and I are not just people, citizens of this world. We are kingdom subjects. We are headed for the kingdom of heaven. And since we are citizens of the kingdom to come, we are different from people who live in this life. So we must be different. And he says we must live out our God-given identity. Live generously and graciously toward others the way God lives towards you. So in other words, if you love people, if you're generous toward people, like the way God is towards us, that is what it means to be perfect and not being sinless, as a lot of people take that text to mean. And Ruth Center says, from that experience, I came to this conclusion. She said, I've concluded that my Christianity isn't very credible. If my coffee pot is always hot for friends who drop by, but my house is cold to strangers. Christianity is unique because it causes us to bring out our best coffee and blueberry muffins and offer them to strangers in need. Christianity is unique because it silently yet powerfully urges us to forget what? forget ourselves, and think about others. You see, the demands of religion. Christians have always struggled to strike a balance between the dual demands of true religion. When it comes to religion, there are two things that are very important: hearing and doing. They are both a part of Christianity, and they're very, very important. Theologians use two technical terms for that: orthodoxy and orthopraxy. You see the word doxy means? Ortho means correct, a true doctrine, doxy, correct, a true practice. And so Christians must practice orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Correct doctrine, correct practice. But there are a lot of Christians who say it's either or. You can either emphasize orthodoxy or orthopraxy. But when you look at the Bible, you realize that the Bible always teaches not either or, but both and. We must both have both correct doctrine and correct practice. And that's what Jesus taught. Believing versus doing. You know, when you look at the non-Christian religions of the world, the non-Christian religions seem to place an emphasis on orthopraxy. We all come from India. Most of us come from India. The Hindus and the Buddhists are so, they place so much emphasis on the practice of their religion. Orthopraxy, right practice, right conduct, right action. But for Christianity, orthodoxy, what you believe is vital. Orthodoxy is the engine that drives orthopraxy. In other words, if you don't have right doctrine, you will not have right practice. You get this? If your theology is not right, then the way you live it out will not be right. If I believe that this world is all there is no heaven, how will I live my life? I will go and have fun and just live it because there's no other day coming, right? If I believe that Jesus loves me, and he died for me, that I don't have to work for my salvation, that I must believe in, accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, then I'm not going to be working hard and trying to earn my salvation. So right doctrine leads to right practice. Who or what we believe in determines our conduct. And so for Christianity, that's very, very important. I'm going to skip these two texts here because it's an additional thing that I put in here. Chuck Swindoll happens to be one of my favorite preachers, and I know your pastor loves him, often quotes from his writings. And Swindoll is a very conservative man. And Swindoll says this: conservative people in the world today, in America, when you look at politics, you see the conservatives are basically the religious people, the religious right. And when you talk to them, you realize that the religious right, the so-called Christians, are the least loving of all the people we have. We have the liberals, the people who don't have so much religion, who don't believe in God, but who are kind to other people. But the rich and the Christians do not want to help the poor, whatever the reasons. But here Chuck Swindoll says, this is how some of the conservatives argue. If you're committed to the truths of Scripture, you shouldn't sweat the needs of people. He says, they say, don't get concerned about people's stuff. Heartaches, hunger, illness, fractured lives, struggles with insecurities, failure and grief, because those are only temporal problems, mere horizontal hassles. Leave that to the liberals. He says, most of these Christians are not worried about how people feel, their problems. They just want to emphasize doctrine because they think that's the most important thing in being a Christian. And these conservatives argue, our main job is to give them the gospel. Just get them saved. Don't get sidetracked by people's pains and problems. It's conversion we really are interested in, not compassion. A lot of Christians say, we must go out there, open God's word and preach to people, convert them. That's what Christ put us in this world for, not to show compassion to people. And so he says, it's conversion we are really interested in, not compassion. Once they're born again and get into the Word, all those things will solve themselves. And he says, isn't that the way it usually is? And Swindoll asked the question, isn't it the fact, he says, isn't it the fact that the more conservative one becomes, the less compassionate? You see, people who believe the Bible, who are strict about doctrine, are also people who are very, very, what shall I say, unconcerned about the poor, unfortunately. And Swindoll says, why should it be that way? He says, I want to know why. Why either or? Why not both and? Why can't we be, he says, why can't we be a theological conservative and personally and compassionate? When did we depart from the biblical model? When did we begin to ignore Christ's care for the needy? When did we opt for placing more emphasis on being proclaimers, more emphasis on doctrine than in practical Christianity? He says, unfortunately, that's how Christians are. And what is the biblical model? He says, when did we depart from the biblical model? What is the biblical model? And whenever I preach about practice of religion, I tend to be misunderstood by people, that I place very little emphasis on doctrine. Okay? So I want to hear me right here. I am not discounting doctrine. Doctrine is important, but practice also is important. We need both of them. And what is the biblical model? The model is given to us right here, by James. Do not merely listen to the word, which is doctrine, and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. You see that? And then here, in the Message Bible, Eugene Peterson puts it this way: anyone who sets himself as religious by talking a good game is self-deceived. This kind of religion is hot air, he says. This kind of religion is hot air. Real religion, the kind that passes muster before God the Father, is this: reach out to the homeless and the loveless in their plight and guard against the corruption of the godless world. He says true religion is reaching out, is doing something for other people, not just following a set of doctrines. And here's from the writings of Jesus himself. What is a true disciple? Who is a true disciple? You want to be a true disciple of Jesus? What marks you out as a true disciple? And here Jesus gives us in John chapter 8 and John chapter 13. To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings. What is that? Is that doctrine or is that practice? What is that? If you hold to my teaching. That is doctrine. So here's Jesus talking to the Jews. Says, if you hold to my teaching, you are really what? My disciples. So what Jesus is saying is, to be my disciple, you must have right doctrine. And there are a lot of Christians who want to throw doctrine out the window. So forget about doctrine. Forget about all of these teachings of the Bible. Let's just love people. Let us just love people. And so Jesus says teaching, true teaching is important to be a true disciple. But then look what he says in John 13:35. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. Here he says doctrine is important. In John 13, Jesus says love is important. Is Jesus a schizophrenic? Is Jesus contradicting himself? Is Jesus talking from both sides of his mouth? What is Jesus saying here? What is Jesus saying here? What Jesus is saying is that both doctrine and practice are important for the Christian. The world will not care how much we know until they know how much we care. So you can have the right doctrine, but if you don't care about people, they are not going to listen to what you have to say. A guy by the name of Scott, I got this from the internet. I didn't get his full name, so I wanted to give him credit. I just put Scott and put a question mark there. This is what Scott writes. I do believe, he says, I believe both orthodoxy, that means right doctrine, and orthopraxy, is right practice, are important. They are interconnected parts, two sides of the same coin. Still, I suppose that at the end of my life, I will not have wished that I had read one more book or understood one more theological term. I will have wished that I had better walked out the call of Christ, which was not firstly that I have top-notch theology, but rather that I follow him and serve him and love others. In other words, what he's saying is, well, doctrine is important. When I come to the end of my life, when I stand before the judgment seat of God, I'm not going to say to myself, oh, I wish I had understood that doctrine a little better, that I'd learned a little more theological terms. He says, well, that is important. What you will feel regret for when you come to the judgment seat of God is that you did not do anything with the knowledge that you had, that you did not love others as Christ commanded you to love. You know, when I talk with people. I mean, I go to seminars, especially we go to these prophecy seminars. And when they talk about the Seventh-day Adventist Church as being the remnant church, they almost always quote this text. Revelation 12:17. Then the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus Christ, which is the spirit of prophecy. And what is this? Is this orthodoxy or orthopraxy? Is this right doctrine or right practice? Both? But essentially, as it jumps out at you, it seems more like it's doctrine, right? And so when Adventists talk to non-Adventists, when we say we are the remnant predicted in the Bible, described in the Bible, we refer to this text and say, we are the remnant of God because we have right doctrine. We keep the Sabbath. We believe in the state of the dead. We believe this, that, and the other. The other people don't believe it. Our doctrine is right, and that is why we are the remnant. And I thank God for this text. Because doctrine, as I said before, doctrine is important. Jesus himself said doctrine is important for you to be true disciples. But if this is all we have, then we are missing something. And I think, unfortunately, that is what has happened to us Christians. We put so much emphasis on doctrine that the world does not see the love of Jesus in us. Mahatma Gandhi once said, if you can't see God in the next person you meet, you need look no further. In other words, people are looking for God in you. They're looking for Christ-like character in you. And when they come to you, when they meet you, they expect to find God-like characters in you, right? For you to be Christians, to behave like Christians, to love others as Christ loved you. But when they come and meet you and they do not find God in you, what are they going to do? They said, if this is what your religion is all about, then I don't want to have anything to do with you. He says, if I don't find God in the next person I meet, you need not look any further. And a lot of people, especially in India, these Hindus and all the other people, they come and meet Christians, and when they find Christians are not loving at all, they say, we don't want to have anything to do with your religion. Ellen White had this beautiful statement. The strongest argument in favor of the gospel is what? A loving and a lovable Christian. I can't say more than that because that is so important. Douglas Cooper was an Adventist pastor many years ago. He retired from the ministry and he became a fisherman, actually, a commercial fisherman. But he wrote a number of beautiful books. And his best-known book is a little book, Living God's Love. And it is from here that I got the title for our sermon today. And Douglas Cooper makes us think when he writes this. This is taken from, when Jesus talks about the judgment day, when the sheep and the goats are separated from each other. And it says, I was in prison, you did not come to visit me. I was hungry, you did not feed me, all of that. That text, Douglas Cooper writes it in his own way. He says, when God reviews the cases of all human beings who have ever lived, he does not ask what they have professed. Instead, he asks, what have they what? What have they done? Have they lived Christ's life? Have they lived for themselves, or have they lived for others? And then he writes it here. The Bible does not say, I was hungry, and you suggested I check out this food stamp program. It says you fed me. It does not say I was thirsty and you shook your head over the shortage of good pure water. It says you gave me to drink. It does not say I was a stranger and you referred me to the proper welfare agency or directed me to the nearest YMCA, and I put in parentheses to the nearest ADRA office. It says you took me in. It does not say I was naked and you felt embarrassed and ignored me. It says you clothed me. It does not say I was sick and you, by paying an honest income tax, supported the Medicare program. It says you visited me. It does not say I was in prison. And you not only voted legislation for a penal rehabilitation program, but you also mailed me some back copies of a church paper, the Review and Herald, and I put in the Columbia Visitor. It's so much easier for us to mail the visitor to somebody than to go and visit them in person. And Cooper writes this in conclusion. He says, many who to their eternal despair will be found in the group that lose out in the judgment will not be bad people. Their theology may be right. Their church attendance remarkably and commendably regular, but they will lose all. Why will they lose all? because they never put their love into action. They did nothing for God or others. The love they professed to have and were certain they had, they never expressed. Therefore, it was never there. Tragically, he says, they cannot be redeemed. You see the balance here? On that last day, many will come to Jesus and profess their knowledge of theology, faithful church attendance, give a faithful tithe, know all the fundamental doctrines of the church, be able to explain this doctrine backwards and forwards, but they did not show love to their fellow human beings. And Douglas Cooper said these people claim to have love, but they did not show that love, and because they did not show it, they never had it in the first place. I want to close with a story. It's a beautiful story. It's a sad story also. I wouldn't call it a beautiful story. I'll say it's a sad story. But it's a story that shows us the tension between right doctrine and right practice. Within the church, within the Adventist church, within Christianity, there are so many people who emphasize doctrine, 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 doctrine. We must do this, we must do this, we must do this. And the others who emphasize love, 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 and maybe no doctrine. But here's a story that appeared in Ministry Magazine a few years ago. Carl Korzat is professor of theology at Walla Walla University. The story is about his eldest daughter, Mindy. Carl says, one summer when Mindy was 15 or 16, 15 years old, she was looking for a summer job and she could not find a job. And so she decided to go 3 or 4 hours away from home to go live with a great-grandmother and take care of her great-grandmother, who also lived, the great-grandmother lived with her daughter. So Mindy said, I'll go there, live with my aunt and with my great-grandmother and spend my summer months there. Carl and his wife says, we were happy for Mindy. She was going to be a good girl, going to help her grandmother, great-grandmother, and she's going to learn some good lessons in how to be kind to other people. And that would be good for her in a Christian experience. But she said, we did not feel comfortable because, she had never left us for an extended period of time. We may have gone for a camp, maybe 2 or 3 days, but she was going to be gone the entire summer. And somehow we felt a little nervous. But we prayed about it, and we let it go. And a couple of days after Mindy left for her great-grandmother's house, Carl Korzat left on a trip to Turkey. Adventist scholars from around the world were meeting for a Bible conference in Turkey. And Carl, being a Bible scholar, was one of them at that conference. And he said the conference went well, and we learned a lot of good things. And he says, 2 days before the conference ended, one night, early in the morning, I heard a thump on my hotel room door. And I said, whenever I hear a noise, a sound on my door, a knock on my door, which seems urgent, I get nervous. He says, as a father, you're always nervous when you hear a sound on the door and your kids haven't come home at night. And you wonder what happened. And he says, most of the times when I worried about my kids, it was nothing serious. The kids would come home, everything would be okay. But this particular time, 7,000 miles away from home, there's a pounding on his hotel door. He opens the door, and the man tells him, sir, there has been an accident back home involving your daughter, Mindy. Please call your wife immediately. He said, I just almost lost it. I was 7,000 miles away from home. There's a terrible accident. I don't have any details. But he went to the phone and he called his wife. And his wife says, one Sabbath afternoon recently, the young people from church went for a walk. They came to a river. And Mindy was in that group. And they saw a girl float across the river. And Mindy and her friend said, let's try that too. And so they too floated across the river. Little realizing that there were strong currents, and as they got to the middle of the river, they were dragged by the strong currents and taken down the river for 1.5 miles. Another girl jumped in to try to save them. And that girl who jumped in lost her life. But Mindy and her friends, Mindy's friend, crossed over to the other side with hardly a scratch. But Mindy was found 1.5 miles down the river, underwater for 15 minutes, They gave her CPR, got her heart to beat again, but they were not sure whether she would be normal again. They took her to the hospital, and there she lay in the hospital. And Carl was 7,000 miles away from home, wondering what had happened to his daughter. And he just left the conference. Two of his friends from the conference drove him 45 miles to the nearest airport in Turkey to fly back home to Washington State in the United States. And he got there to the airport, and the man who could issue his ticket, changed the ticket, advanced it by 2 days, was an hour late. And so he finally got a new ticket. He got on the plane and he flew out, and he came to Amsterdam to change his flight there. And in Amsterdam, he had to wait for 5 long hours. And Carl says, the 5 hours were the longest hours of my life. I just couldn't, I was going to lose it right there. And he said, I turned to my Bible. I flipped through my Bible looking for promises in the Bible to console myself. He said, as a pastor, as a theologian, as a teacher who taught people before, I've gone to people's homes, I've taught students, I've preached sermons, I've written books about God's love, and I've had all these lists of texts that I would read to people in times of crisis. And as I opened my Bible and read those texts that I had once read to other people, none of those texts spoke to me. They brought no comfort to me. He says, so I flipped through the Bible, flipped it through, looking for a text, looking for something that would bring solace to my aching heart. And then he came to Mark chapter 5, the story of Jairus. You remember the story of Jairus? Jairus' little girl was dying. And the father comes to Jesus and said, Lord, my daughter is dying. And then the story says, Jesus said, and the story says, and he went with Jairus. When Jairus came, Jesus went with Jairus to Jairus' home. And Carl says, when I read that, that brought me comfort. I knew that even though I was alone, traveling 7,000 miles to my home in America, I was not alone on this trip. Jesus was going to go with me as he went with Jairus. And so when I read Jairus' story, he says, it brought me comfort. And then also in that story, Jesus says to Jairus, be of good cheer. Be courageous. And that also spoke to me. Be of good cheer. I knew God was going to help me. God was on my side. And he says, I traveled 48 hours after I got the news. I finally made it to my daughter's bedside. He said, I had a red scarf that I bought for her. A day before I was to leave the conference, Mindy sent me an email saying, Daddy, can't wait to see you on Sunday. That was the last message he received from his daughter. And he brought this scarf and he laid it by her bed, and he saw Mindy motionless on the bed. She had died. She had 5 hours before he got there. She was brain dead, and now she was dead. And Carl says, when I thought about Jairus' story and my story, I know there was one major difference between the two. Jairus' story ends in joy because Jesus says to the little girl, Tabitha, little girl, wake up. And Jairus' daughter wakes up, and Jairus embraces his daughter. But he says, my story does not end there, because my daughter does not wake up. Instead, a few days later, we put her in the grave. But I have that hope that one day soon she will hear the voice of the life giver, and she will wake up, and then I will be able to embrace her and tell her how much I love her. He wrote this story, Carl Korzat, in the Advent Review. The title of the article, My Journey with Jairus. And when Adventists around the world read this story, they started writing letters to him, letters of comfort, to tell him how much they feel for him and to encourage him in his Christian walk, letters of sympathy. And his letters kept coming, they kept coming, they kept coming. And then about 5 months after all this happened, one day as he was going through his letters, he saw a letter handwritten. The address was handwritten. He did not recognize the from address, but he said to himself, maybe it has to do with Mindy's death, and here's another letter from somebody, a letter of comfort for me. And so he picked up that letter, he opened it, and he read it. And this is what the letter said. Dear Pastor Korzat, we were very saddened, me and my husband, that's she and her husband, and impressed with your story of Mindy in the review. However, he says, we have a deep concern. When we were raising our children, we strongly emphasized Isaiah chapter 58, verses 13 and 14, where it tells us how to keep the Sabbath. Do not do your own pleasure on the Sabbath. That is God's holy day. And this lady writes, we have known of people, Adventist people, whose son went swimming on Sabbath, another one went water skiing on the Sabbath, and they were both killed. What good is that kind of pleasure when you're going against God's word? And he says, I wonder, as a teacher of religion, as a professor of theology in an Adventist institution, do you ever teach your students how to keep the Sabbath correctly? And then it says, good luck. She ended the letter. Carl says, when I read that letter, I was angry. I'd experienced so much hurt, and here was a fellow Adventist writing a letter. Instead of showing compassion for me, she had went and stabbed me again in my heart. And it hurt so much. I was angry. I wanted to tear the letter to pieces. But he says, I kept that letter. And he wrote another article, this time in Ministry Magazine, A Broken Commandment or an Affirmation of Hope. And he refers to that letter from that lady. He says, I write this letter. I quote this letter from this lady in this article, not so that you can have sympathy for me. I don't want that. I don't write this letter so that you can be judge that lady as being mean. If I did that, I would be just as mean as her. But he said, I kept that letter, and as I read that letter over and over again, I said to myself, maybe we too are that way. We may not say it the way she said it, but there are times when we as Christians know only half the picture. We see only the outside. We just see the outward appearance. We have just limited information, but we jump to conclusions. She said, Carl says, this lady knew nothing about Mindy, my daughter, her relationship with God. But what happened on that Sabbath as she floated across the river, she said she broke the Sabbath and God killed her. And that hurt me. And he says, I too have been guilty of doing that. And Carl says, 2 weeks before he went to Turkey, before Mindy went to her great-grandmother's house, Carl said there was a young people's meeting on Friday evening. And they had a special program for Christian education. They were raising funds for Christian education. And they wanted to get people to testify, testimony service, to tell others how much Christian education has meant to them. And they got a young girl to come forward. And she stood before the group at Vespers that night. And she said, Christian education has meant so much. Jesus Christ means so much. He has changed my life completely. And Carl says he sat there and he heard that young girl speak. And he said, as he looked at that girl, she had bright pink hair. Her hair, she was dressed shabbily. She looked awful. And I said to myself, couldn't they have gotten a better specimen of Christianity? If they wanted somebody as a specimen of what Christ has done for them and transformed their lives, why couldn't they have gotten somebody who was a better example of what Christianity has done for them? Why this girl so shabbily dressed with a bright pink hair? And then he said to himself, I shouldn't be saying that. I shouldn't be saying that. I do not know anything about her. I can see her pink hair, but I can't see her heart. And he said, God, forgive me for judging this poor girl that so harshly. And Carl ends his article by saying this. He says, it was only, he said, only after my daughter's funeral that I discovered that that brave girl who jumped into the river to save my daughter and the other girl was none other than the girl with the pink hair. She said as a new Christian, she knew very little about Christianity. She did not know the 28 fundamental doctrines of the Adventist Church. If you had asked her to tell the difference between justification and sanctification, she wouldn't know that. If you asked her to explain the doctrine of the Sabbath or the 2,300-day prophecy, she perhaps wouldn't be able to explain that. Her theology was limited and perhaps even faulty. But she knew what it was to express God's love, and that's what made all the difference. And so as I say to you today, as we live in this world, the world is looking at us as Christ's people. Yes, it's important. Doctrine is very, very important. Jesus said so. The disciples said so. Doctrine is important. Unless we have a right doctrine, we will not have right practice. Well, let us not stop with the doctrine itself and make that all important. This lady, for her, doctrine was all that mattered. But for this little girl with the pink hair, she knew what it meant to live God's love. So I hope that we too will find that balance between right doctrine and right practice. The world is looking to us. And the disciples said to Jesus before he went to heaven, now that you're with us, they know we are your disciples. But after you're gone, after you're no longer with us, how will the world know that we are your disciples? And what did Jesus say? By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. Right doctrine, right practice. That's the only way to do it. And I pray that God will give us the courage to stand for what is right, the teachings of the Bible. Let us not dilute those teachings, but let us also demonstrate the love of Christ in our lives. To know what it means. Living God's love is the all-important thing for us as Christians. If you don't do that, everything else goes out the window. Nobody is going to listen to you. Mahatma Gandhi was right. If I don't see God in the next person I meet, don't bother to look any further.